The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, an elegant cream-colored envelope with gold trim. I recognized my granddaughter Melissa's handwriting immediately. For a moment, I just held it, savoring the weight of the paper between my weathered fingers. At 68, I'd learned to appreciate these small moments, the tangible connections to family that remained. Inside was a beautifully crafted wedding invitation. Melissa, my oldest granddaughter, was getting married to her college sweetheart, James. The wedding was to be held at the Rosewood Estate, one of the most exclusive venues in Connecticut. I smiled, pride swelling in my chest. Despite everything that had happened between me and my son Richard, Melissa had always made an effort to keep me in her life. I live alone now in a modest two-bedroom house on the outskirts of Hartford. It's nothing fancy, but it's paid for. One of the few assets I managed to keep after the family reorganization, as Richard euphemistically called it. My late wife Sarah would have hated what our home had become. A quiet, sometimes lonely place with too many empty rooms and photographs that served as both comfort and reminder of what I'd lost. For 43 years, I worked at Northeastern Fabrication, starting on the factory floor and eventually becoming plant manager. I saved every penny I could, invested carefully, and built what I thought was a secure future for my family. We weren't wealthy by Connecticut standards, but we were comfortable. I put Richard through business school at NYU without him having to take a single loan. I helped with the down payment on his first house. When he started his own financial advisory firm, I was his first investor. "Dad," he had said to me 15 years ago, eyes bright with ambition, "this is our legacy. Everything I'm building is for our family, for Melissa and Tyler, for the future generations of Millers." I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my son, Sarah's boy, raised with the values we had worked so hard to instill. Honesty, loyalty, family first. The phone rang, pulling me from my memories. It was Melissa. "Grandpa, did you get it?" Her voice was excited, youthful. At 28, she had her grandmother's eyes and, thankfully, her grandmother's heart. "I did, sweetheart. It's beautiful. I'm so happy for you and James. You'll come, right? It wouldn't be the same without you." I hesitated. The thought of seeing Richard and his wife Vanessa made my stomach tighten. The last time we were in the same room was at Sarah's funeral 3 years ago, and even then, the conversation had been strained, performative. "Of course I'll be there," I said, forcing warmth into my voice. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." "Good." She paused. "Dad will be there, obviously, and Vanessa. I know things are complicated, but it's my day, Grandpa, and I want my whole family there. Don't worry about me, Melissa. This is your special day. I'll be on my best behavior." After we hung up, I walked to the small home office I kept in what used to be the guest bedroom. In the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, behind folders of tax returns and insurance policies, was a sealed envelope. I hadn't looked at its contents in almost a year, but I knew exactly what was inside. Bank statements, transfer records, emails I had printed out, and a USB drive with recorded conversations, the evidence of my son's betrayal. It had started small, as these things often do. Richard suggesting that I consolidate my retirement accounts under his management, recommendations to invest in exciting opportunities that his firm was backing, the creation of a family trust that would protect our assets and streamline inheritance. I trusted him. He was my son, but he was also a financial advisor with impressive credentials and a growing list of wealthy clients. When he suggested that I sign over the deed to the family home to the trust for tax purposes, I hesitated, but ultimately agreed. When he recommended liquidating my Northeastern Fabrication pension for a more dynamic investment vehicle, I followed his advice. By the time I realized what was happening, it was nearly too late. Richard had systematically transferred most of my assets into accounts and investments that, while technically part of the family trust, were entirely under his control. The home Sarah and I had paid off 20 years ago now belonged to a legal entity that I had virtually no access to. My retirement savings had been moved into high-risk investments that had mysteriously underperformed, while Richard's personal accounts flourished. The final blow came after Sarah passed away. In my grief, I hadn't paid close attention to the documents Richard had brought over for me to sign. Paperwork, he said, was necessary to sort out Mom's estate. 6 months later, I discovered that I had signed away my rights to most of what Sarah and I had built together over our 45-year marriage. When I confronted him, His response chilled me to the bone. "Dad, you're getting older. Managing these assets is complicated. I'm protecting our family legacy. Besides, you don't need much at your age. Your house is paid for, and the monthly stipend from the trust covers your basic needs." "Stipend?" I had repeated, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. "You're giving me an allowance from my own money." His expression had been a mixture of pity and impatience. "It's not your money anymore, Dad. It's the family's money, and I'm making sure it grows for the next generation." That night I had sat alone in my kitchen, the kitchen where I had once hosted family dinners, where Sarah and I had laughed and argued and made up, where I had taught Richard how to make pancakes on Sunday mornings, and I had wept for the first time since Sarah's funeral. But grief eventually hardens into something else, something with purpose. I might have been old, but I wasn't helpless. I had built something from nothing once before. I could do it again, but this time with a different goal in mind: justice. The week before Melissa's wedding, I received another call from her. "Grandpa, I was wondering if you'd do something special for me at the wedding." "Anything, sweetheart. Would you give a toast?" After Dad's, of course, it would mean so much to me. I closed my eyes, imagining the scene. Richard standing up first, glass raised, the successful son, the proud father, and then me, the old man, the afterthought. "I'd be honored," I said, because what else could I say? "Thank you. And Grandpa? Wear your navy suit, the one Grandma always loved. You look handsome in it." After we hung up, I went to the closet and pulled out the suit. It had been Sarah's favorite, a deep navy blue that she said brought out the color of my eyes. I hadn't worn it since her funeral. As I ran my hand over the fabric, I felt a sense of determination settle over me. Melissa's wedding wouldn't just be a family reunion. It would be the culmination of 3 years of careful planning, of quiet, methodical work, to reclaim what was rightfully mine, and to teach my son the lesson he so desperately needed to learn. I carefully took the suit out of its garment bag. Yes, this would do nicely. After all, every good revenge story needs the right costume. The Rosewood estate was everything the name suggested: elegant, old-money New England, with manicured gardens and a colonial-style mansion that had been converted into one of the most sought-after wedding venues in the state. As my taxi pulled up the long, tree-lined driveway, I could see white chairs arranged in perfect rows on the lawn, a flower-covered arch at the front, and staff in formal attire bustling about with last-minute preparations. I adjusted my tie, a deep blue silk that Sarah had given me for our 40th anniversary, and tried to calm the nervous energy that had been building since morning. In my inside jacket pocket was a small, sealed envelope. Everything hinged on its contents and my timing. "Mr. Miller," a young woman with a clipboard approached as I stepped out of the taxi. "I'm Ava, the wedding coordinator. Melissa asked me to keep an eye out for you. The family is gathering in the East Wing before the ceremony." "Thank you." "Ava, I appreciate it." She led me through the mansion's side entrance and down a hallway adorned with tasteful artwork and fresh flower arrangements. I could hear muffled voices and laughter coming from behind a closed door at the end of the corridor. "Here we are," Ava said, knocking lightly before opening the door. "Mr. Miller has arrived." The room fell quiet as I entered. It was a spacious sitting room converted into a pre-wedding gathering space. Melissa was there in a silk robe, her hair and makeup already done, surrounded by her bridesmaids. Tyler, my grandson, stood by the window in his groomsman's tux, phone in hand, and there in the center of the room was Richard. My son had aged well, I had to admit. At 46, his hair was just beginning to gray at the temples, giving him that distinguished look that probably impressed his clients. He wore an expensive suit that I guessed cost more than 3 months of the stipend he provided me. Beside him was Vanessa, his second wife, 15 years his junior and dressed impeccably in a designer outfit that probably cost as much as his suit. "Dad." Richard's greeting was cordial but cool, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Glad you could make it." "I wouldn't miss my granddaughter's wedding," I replied, matching his tone. Melissa broke the tension by rushing over and embracing me. "Grandpa, you look so handsome." I hugged her tightly, breathing in the scent of her perfume, so similar to what Sarah used to wear. "And you look absolutely beautiful, sweetheart. Your grandmother would be so proud." "She'd be crying already," Melissa laughed, but I could see tears glistening in her eyes. "Probably," I agreed, my own throat tightening. Tyler approached next, giving me a firm handshake that turned into a quick hug. "Good to see you, Grandpa." "You too, Ty. How's law school treating you?" "Brutal, but I'm hanging in there. Second year is supposed to be the worst. Richard cleared his throat. Dad, you remember Vanessa, of course. Vanessa stepped forward with a practiced smile. Charles, it's been too long, you're looking well. I nodded politely. Vanessa, thank you for the birthday card last month. It had been a generic store-bought card with their names signed at the bottom. No personal message, and no gift, just enough to satisfy the obligation of remembering their elderly father-in-law. Oh, of course, she said, waving a hand adorned with a diamond ring that I was fairly certain had once belonged to Sarah. Family is everything. I bit back the retort that sprang to my lips. Today wasn't about my grievances. It was about Melissa's happiness, and about the plan I had set in motion months ago, a plan that would reach its conclusion tonight. The next hour passed in a blur of photographs, greetings, and preparations. I kept to myself as much as possible, exchanging pleasantries with relatives and old family friends, many of whom seemed surprised to see me. I overheard one of Richard's cousins whisper to his wife, I thought the old man was in a home somewhere. It took considerable restraint not to correct him. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Melissa looked radiant as she walked down the aisle on Richard's arm. I sat in the front row, the place reserved for immediate family, though I noticed I was positioned at the far end, as far from Richard and Vanessa's seats as possible, while still being technically in the family section. As Melissa and James exchanged vows, I found myself thinking of my own wedding day, of Sarah in her simple white dress, her eyes shining with love and promise. We had started with so little, a one-bedroom apartment, entry-level jobs, second-hand furniture, but we had built a life together, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. We had created something real, something earned, not like Richard, who had taken shortcuts, who had betrayed the very principles I had tried to teach him. The reception was held in the Rosewood's grand ballroom, a space transformed by twinkling lights, lush floral arrangements, and tables set with fine china and crystal. I was seated at the family table, again at the far end, next to some distant cousins of James's family, who seemed unsure of who I was. Dinner was served, some kind of gourmet chicken dish that Sarah would have appreciated more than I did, and then it was time for the toasts. Richard stood first, champagne glass in hand, and the room quieted. For those who don't know me, I'm Richard Miller, Melissa's proud father, he began, his voice confident, practiced. When my little girl told me she was getting married, my first thought was, no man will ever be good enough for her. Polite laughter rippled through the crowd. But then I got to know James and I realized I was wrong. He is good enough. Barely. More laughter. Louder this time. Richard continued with a polished speech about watching Melissa grow up, about the values he and his late mother had instilled in her, about the bright future ahead for the young couple. He spoke about family legacy, about passing down wisdom and support from one generation to the next. He even mentioned how he had secured their financial future with a generous gift to help them start their married life, a gift I knew that likely came from funds that should have been partly mine. To Melissa and James, he concluded, raising his glass higher, may your lives together be as blessed as ours has been. Your mother would be so proud, honey, and I know that I speak for our entire family when I say, we love you, we support you, and we will always be here for you. Applause filled the room. Richard sat down, accepting pats on the back, and murmured compliments from those nearby. Vanessa squeezed his hand, beaming with pride. Then the wedding coordinator approached me, whispering that it was my turn. I nodded, took a deep breath, and stood. The room gradually quieted again, though with less immediacy than it had for Richard. Several guests leaned toward each other, whispering, clearly wondering who this old man was and why he was speaking. Good evening, I began, my voice steadier than I expected. For those who don't know me, I'm Charles Miller, Melissa's grandfather, Richard's father. I saw Richard shift uncomfortably in his seat, his expression a mixture of impatience and embarrassment. Vanessa whispered something to him, her smile now fixed and artificial. When Melissa asked me to give a toast today, I was honored but also a bit surprised. At my age, we elders are often tucked away, brought out for special occasions, but not expected to say much. I paused, allowing a small ripple of knowing laughter from the older guests in the room. But Melissa has always been special that way. Even as a little girl, she wanted to hear the old stories, to know where she came from. I looked directly at my granddaughter, who was watching me with a warm smile, her hand clasped in her new husband's. Melissa, Your grandmother Sarah and I were married for 45 years before she left this world. We didn't start with much, but we built something together. A home, a family, a legacy of hard work and honesty. Your grandmother used to say that a marriage isn't just about love, it's about partnership, about facing life's challenges together and never forgetting that you're on the same team. I took a sip of water, aware that every eye in the room was on me. I've been thinking a lot about legacy lately, about what we leave behind when we're gone. Some people think legacy is about money or property or social standing, but I've come to believe it's about something else entirely. Richard was no longer pretending to smile. His jaw was tense, his eyes narrowed slightly, as if sensing that my speech was veering into territory he wouldn't like. True legacy, Melissa, is about the values you live by and the examples you set. It's about integrity, about keeping your promises, especially to those who have sacrificed for you. It's about recognizing that success built on deception isn't success at all. It's just a house of cards waiting to collapse. The room had grown uncomfortably quiet. I could feel the tension radiating from Richard's end of the table, but I continued. Your grandmother would be so proud of the woman you've become, Melissa. Proud of your kindness, your loyalty, your sense of justice. James, I turned to her husband, you're getting not just a wonderful wife, but an inheritance of values that can't be measured in dollars. Cherish that. Protect it. I reached into my jacket pocket and withdrew the sealed envelope I had brought with me. Which brings me to my wedding gift. Richard shifted forward in his seat, his expression now openly alarmed. Melissa and James, I wanted to give you something meaningful, something that represents what I believe marriage and family should be about. I held up the envelope. This contains documentation of a trust I've established in your names. A trust created from assets that I've spent the last 3 years quietly recovering and securing. I heard Richard's sharp intake of breath from across the table. The trust includes ownership shares in several properties, including the original family home that your grandmother and I built our lives in, as well as investment accounts that will provide you with financial security for years to come. But there's a condition attached to this gift. I looked directly at Richard now, holding his gaze. The condition is that these assets can never be managed, controlled, or accessed by your father or anyone at his firm. They are yours, and yours alone, to steward responsibly. A murmur ran through the assembled guests. Richard's face had gone pale, then flushed with anger. Vanessa was whispering urgently to him, her perfectly manicured hand gripping his arm. This isn't the time or place for a full explanation of why I've structured things this way, I continued, looking back at Melissa, whose expression was one of confusion and concern. That's a conversation for another day, but know this, everything in this trust was rightfully mine to give. Everything was earned through decades of honest work and careful planning. Everything represents the true Miller family legacy, not the distorted version that some might have led you to believe. I raised my glass. To Melissa and James, may your marriage be built on honesty, mutual respect, and true partnership. May you never forget that real wealth isn't measured by bank accounts, but by the integrity with which you live your lives. And may you always protect what matters most, not possessions but principles. The applause that followed was scattered and uncertain. Most guests seemed unsure of what had just happened, sensing the undercurrents but not understanding their source. I placed the envelope in front of Melissa, who looked up at me with questions in her eyes. I squeezed her shoulder gently before returning to my seat. Richard was staring at me, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he hissed across the table, keeping his voice low enough that only I could hear. "Giving my granddaughter a wedding gift," I replied calmly, "and beginning to set things right." "You have no idea what you've done," he said, his voice trembling with rage. "No idea what you've started." I met his gaze steadily. "Actually, son, I know exactly what I've started. What you don't realize is what I've already finished." Before he could respond, the band began playing, signaling the start of the first dance. All eyes turned to Melissa and James as they moved to the center of the dance floor. But I could feel Richard's glare burning into me, and I knew that the battle lines had been drawn. The war for justice had officially begun. The remainder of the reception passed in a blur of strained pleasantries and pointed avoidance. Richard and Vanessa made a show of circulating among the guests, laughing too loudly and drinking too much, but I noticed they stayed as far from me as possible. Melissa and James were caught up in the celebration, accepting congratulations and dancing with friends. though I caught my granddaughter glancing in my direction several times, her expression thoughtful. It was nearly midnight when I decided to leave. The party was still in full swing, but at my age, stamina had its limits. I had just collected my coat from the attendant when I felt a hand on my arm. "Grandpa, you weren't going to leave without saying goodbye, were you?" Melissa stood there, slightly flushed from dancing, still radiant in her wedding gown. "I didn't want to pull you away from your celebration, sweetheart," I said, smiling at her. "It's been a beautiful wedding." She glanced around to ensure we were alone, then held up the envelope I had given her. "What is this really about? Dad's been acting strange ever since your toast. Vanessa looks like she's seen a ghost." I sighed, taking her hands in mine. "It's complicated, Melissa, and not something to get into on your wedding night, but everything I said in my toast was true. That envelope contains documentation of a trust I've set up for you and James, with assets that are rightfully mine to give. But the condition about Dad not being involved," she frowned. "What happened between you two? He always told us you were struggling with memory issues after Grandma died, that you needed his help managing your affairs. The manipulation ran deeper than I had realized. Is that what he told you?" I kept my voice gentle. "Melissa, I have all my faculties intact. I worked until I was 65 and managed our family finances for decades. What your father did was, well, let's just say he took advantage of my grief after your grandmother passed." Her eyes widened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that we'll have a long talk soon, after you get back from your honeymoon. I have documentation, evidence of everything, but tonight is your night and I won't spoil it with family drama." She bit her lip, clearly torn. "You're sure you're okay? Do you need anything?" "I'm better than I've been in years," I assured her. "And the only thing I need is for you to enjoy your wedding and your honeymoon. We'll sort everything else out when you get back." Melissa hugged me tightly. "I love you, Grandpa. Whatever's going on, we'll figure it out." "I love you too, sweetheart. And congratulations again. James is a lucky man." After she returned to the reception, I stepped outside into the cool night air. My taxi was waiting, but I took a moment to look back at the Rosewood estate, its windows glowing warmly in the darkness. Inside was the family I had helped build, a family now fractured by betrayal and deception, but also a family with members like Melissa, who carried Sarah's heart and moral compass. There was hope there. Hope for justice, hope for healing, hope for a legacy reclaimed. As the taxi pulled away, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Patricia Winters, my attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had been instrumental in my 3-year plan to recover my assets. "All documents filed as scheduled. Meeting with SEC representatives confirmed for Tuesday. Are you sure about this timeline?" I typed back, "Yes. No turning back now." 3 days later, I was sitting in my modest living room when the doorbell rang. I already knew who it would be. Richard's sleek BMW had pulled into my driveway moments earlier, the engine revving aggressively before falling silent. I took my time answering the door, moving deliberately, making him wait. When I finally opened it, Richard pushed past me without a greeting, storming into the living room. His face was haggard, his eyes bloodshot. He looked like he hadn't slept since the wedding. "What the hell have you done?" he demanded, his voice hoarse with anger and what sounded like fear. I closed the front door calmly and followed him. "You'll need to be more specific, Richard." He spun around, jabbing a finger in my direction. "Don't play games with me. The trust you announced at the wedding. The SEC inquiry that arrived at my office this morning. The freeze on the family trust accounts. This is your doing, isn't it?" I settled into my favorite armchair, motioning for Richard to sit. He remained standing, too agitated to comply. "Yes," I said simply. "It's my doing. 3 years of careful work coming to fruition." 3 years? He paced the small room like a caged animal. "You've been planning this for 3 years. Since about 6 months after your mother died. When I discovered what you had done with the paperwork you had me sign during my grief." I kept my voice level, controlled. "It took me a while to understand the full extent of your betrayal, even longer to figure out how to address it. But I've had time, Richard, and motivation. You have no idea what you're messing with," he said, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "The SEC, freezing accounts? Do you have any concept of what this could do to my business, my reputation?" "I have a very clear concept," I replied, "just as I have a clear understanding of what you did to me. How you systematically transferred assets that your mother and I spent decades building into accounts and investments that you controlled. How you manipulated me during my grief. How you reduced me to living on an allowance from my own money. It was all legal, he snapped. You signed everything willingly, under false pretenses, under the belief that my son would honor his fiduciary duty, both legally and morally. I leaned forward. And some of what you did wasn't legal at all, Richard. The misdirection of funds, the falsified investment reports, the undisclosed conflicts of interest, all documented, all preserved, all now in the hands of both my attorney and the relevant authorities. His face drained of color. You wouldn't do this, I'm your son. Yes, you are my son, which made your betrayal all the more painful. I stood up slowly, facing him. I didn't want it to come to this, Richard. I gave you chances to make it right. I tried to talk to you about what you were doing 2 years ago, remember? You dismissed me, treated me like a senile old man who didn't understand finance anymore. I was protecting our family legacy. No, I said firmly, you were stealing it. There's a difference. He collapsed onto the sofa, his bravado crumbling. What do you want? Money? Control of the accounts again? What will it take to make this go away? Justice, I said simply. Accountability. And yes, the return of what is rightfully mine. And if I refuse? Then the SEC investigation continues. The documentation I've gathered goes public. Your clients learn exactly how you've been operating. Your license comes under review. Richard stared at me, a mixture of disbelief and dawning respect in his eyes. I never thought you had this in you, this ruthlessness. It's not ruthlessness, I corrected him. It's principle. Something I tried to teach you, apparently without success. We sat in silence for a long moment, the ticking of the mantel clock the only sound in the room. Finally, Richard spoke again, his voice quieter. What exactly are your terms? I reached for a folder on the side table and handed it to him. My attorney drew these up. In essence, you return control of my assets to me, all of them, including the family home. You resign as trustee of any accounts in my name. You provide a full accounting of all transactions you've made with my money over the past 5 years. And you agree to never attempt to manage my finances again. He flipped through the documents, his expression growing darker. And Melissa's trust, the one you announced at the wedding? That stays exactly as I structured it. Assets that are rightfully mine, placed in trust for her and James. Explicitly outside your control. This will ruin me, he said, closing the folder. No, I corrected him. This will hold you accountable. What ruins people is their own actions, not the consequences of those actions. Richard stood abruptly. I need time to review this with my own attorney. You have 48 hours, I said. After that, things progressed to the next stage. He moved toward the door, then paused, turning back to me. You know, all these years I thought I was the smart one, the savvy businessman. I looked at you, working the same job for decades, living in the same house, driving old cars, and I thought you just didn't understand how to really build wealth. And now I'm wondering if I ever really knew you at all. He shook his head. You realize this changes everything between us. Whatever relationship we had, it's gone. Richard, I said softly, our relationship was gone the moment you decided to betray me. What's changing now is simply the balance of power. After he left, I sat alone in my quiet house, feeling neither triumph nor sorrow, just a weary sense of necessity. Sarah would have been heartbroken to see what our son had become and what I had been forced to do in response. But she also would have understood that some principles couldn't be compromised, even for family, especially for family. The next 6 weeks were a whirlwind of legal meetings, document signings and carefully negotiated terms. Richard, faced with the overwhelming evidence I had accumulated and the very real threat of regulatory action, eventually capitulated to most of my demands. The family home was returned to my name. Control of my investment accounts was transferred back to me. A full accounting of all transactions was provided, revealing even more financial manipulation than I had initially discovered. Throughout it all, Richard remained coldly professional, treating the process like a business negotiation rather than a family reckoning. Vanessa stopped speaking to me entirely, apparently blaming me for their sudden downsizing to a smaller house and the sale of their vacation property in the Hamptons. Melissa and James returned from their honeymoon to find the family in turmoil. True to my word, I sat down with them and explained everything, showing them the documentation of Richard's actions and my response. My granddaughter was devastated by her father's betrayal, but grateful for the trust I had established for her, a trust that would now provide her with financial security, independent of her father's control. "I always thought Dad was so successful," she said during one of our conversations, "that everything he had was earned." "Some of it was," I acknowledged. "Your father is a smart man, a capable financial advisor in many ways. He just lost his moral compass when it came to family money." "But why? We weren't hurting for anything." I shook my head. "That's a question only he can answer, Melissa. Greed doesn't always make sense, especially when you already have enough." The most surprising development came from Tyler. My grandson had always been closer to Richard than to me, following in his father's footsteps with his interest in finance and law. But after learning what had happened, he showed up at my door one evening, looking troubled. "Grandpa, I need to talk to you," he said, accepting the coffee I offered. "About Dad. About what he did." "I'm listening." Tyler ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father's that it made my heart ache. "I think I knew something wasn't right. The way Dad talked about you after Grandma died, making comments about how you couldn't handle money anymore, how you needed to be managed. I didn't question it because, well, he's my dad. I trusted him. That's natural, Ty. He's your father." "But he was wrong," Tyler insisted, his young face earnest and troubled. "What he did to you was wrong. And I think I might have been complicit in some ways. He had me review some of the trust documents last year as part of my practical legal education. I thought it was just experience for law school, but now I wonder if he was trying to normalize what he'd done, to make me part of it." The revelations stung but didn't surprise me. Richard had always been strategic in his manipulations. "You weren't complicit, Tyler. You were misled, like I was." "Maybe." He took a deep breath. "But I want to make it right. I've been thinking. After I finish law school, I'd like to specialize in elder law, help protect people from the kind of financial abuse that happened to you." I felt a surge of pride and hope. My grandson finding purpose in our family's painful chapter. "I think that would be a fine choice, Ty. Your grandmother would be proud." "There's something else," he added hesitantly. "I'd like to learn from you about finances, about investing the right way. Dad's methods, I don't want to be that kind of person." And so began a new weekly tradition. Tyler visiting on Sunday afternoons, sitting at my kitchen table with notebooks and laptops, learning the principles of ethical investing and financial management that I had tried to teach his father years ago. It was a small redemption, a thread of legacy preserved. Richard and I established an uneasy détente. We saw each other at family gatherings, Thanksgiving at Melissa's new home, Christmas Eve dinner, but our interactions were minimal and strained. He had lost more than just control of my assets. He had lost the respect of his children and many in his professional circle, as rumors of the near SEC investigation had spread despite our settlement. One evening in early spring, almost a year after Melissa's wedding, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. It was Richard standing alone on my porch, looking older and more subdued than I had ever seen him. "Dad," he said simply, "can I come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside to let him enter. We moved to the living room, the scene of our confrontation months earlier. This time, however, there was no anger in the air, just a heavy, sad weariness. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Richard began, sitting on the edge of the sofa, "about what happened, about what I did." I waited, not making it easier for him, but not making it harder either. "I told myself I was protecting the family legacy," he continued, "that I was being smart, strategic, that you wouldn't understand the financial mechanisms I was using." He looked down at his hands. "But the truth is simpler and uglier. I got greedy. I saw an opportunity when Mom died and you were vulnerable, and I took it." The admission hung in the air between us, unexpected and raw. "Vanessa left me," he added after a moment, "said she didn't sign up for a downgrade in lifestyle. Turns out her commitment was to my bank accounts, not to me." I felt a complexity of emotions, a small vindication, but also sorrow for my son's pain. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Richard," he gave a bitter laugh, "are you, after what she helped me do to you?" "I'm sorry for your pain," I clarified. "Not for the end of a relationship built on such a shaky foundation." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough." Another pause. "Tyler told me about his Sunday sessions with you, learning about investing. He's a bright young man. Ethical, too. Reminds me of your mother." Richard winced at the implied comparison. "I've lost them, haven't I? My children's respect." "You've damaged it," I acknowledged. "Whether it's lost forever depends on what you do next." "What would you do?" he asked quietly. "If you were me?" The question surprised me. My son asking for my guidance after all that had happened. I considered my answer carefully. I would start with genuine atonement. Not just words but actions. I would find ways to make amends, not just to me, but to Melissa and Tyler, whose trust you also betrayed. I would examine the values and priorities that led you down this path and work to realign them. And I would give everyone time. Trust, once broken, isn't easily rebuilt. Richard was silent for a long time, absorbing my words. Finally, he stood. I don't expect forgiveness, Dad, but I am sorry. Truly sorry. I believe you, I said, and was surprised to realize that I did. That's a start. After he left, I walked through the house. My house returned to my name through my own efforts. In Sarah's old study, I kept a photograph of our family taken years ago. Sarah and me, a young Richard, all smiling at a 4th of July picnic. I picked it up, studying my son's youthful face, wondering at the path that had led us from that innocent moment to where we were now. We did our best with him, Sarah, I murmured to the empty room, and maybe there's still hope. The next day, I received a call from Melissa. Grandpa, something strange happened. Dad came to see us last night. He apologized, like really apologized for everything. Then he gave us a check, said it was a proper wedding gift, money he'd earned honestly, and he asked if he could start coming to your Sunday sessions with Tyler, to relearn things the right way, he said. I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, exactly, but perhaps the possibility of it. What did you tell him? I said that would be up to you, Melissa replied, but that we'd be willing to give him a second chance if you were. Later that evening, I sat on my back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and purple. My phone sat on the table beside me, Richard's number pulled up, but not yet dialed. I wasn't ready to invite him to the Sunday sessions, not yet, but I was considering it. The road to reconciliation would be long and uncertain. Trust, as I had told Richard, couldn't be restored overnight, but in taking the first steps toward genuine atonement, my son had opened a door that I had thought permanently closed. As the light faded from the sky, I thought about legacy, not just the financial assets I had fought to reclaim, but the more important inheritance of values, principles, and integrity. Perhaps the greatest surprise of all was that through this painful ordeal, that true legacy had been strengthened rather than destroyed. Melissa and Tyler had witnessed firsthand the importance of honesty and ethical behavior. They had seen the consequences of betrayal, but also the possibility of redemption. And I had discovered strengths in myself that I hadn't known existed, a resilience and determination that Sarah would have recognized and approved of. I had fought not just for what was rightfully mine, but for the principles we had built our lives around. In the growing darkness, I finally picked up my phone and typed a message to my son. Sunday 2 p.m., bring a notebook and an open mind. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely, but it was a beginning, a chance to rebuild what had been broken, to reclaim not just financial assets, but something far more valuable. Family bonds founded on truth rather than deception. Sometimes, I reflected, the most important surprises aren't the ones that happen to us, but the ones we create ourselves through our choices and actions. At Melissa's wedding, Richard had tried to humiliate me, to relegate me to the role of doddering old man while he played the successful, generous patriarch. But the surprise had been mine to deliver, the revelation that I wasn't as helpless or oblivious as he had believed. And now, perhaps, there was one final surprise still unfolding, the possibility that from the ashes of betrayal, something new and better might eventually emerge. A reconciliation based not on pretense, but on hard-earned truth, a legacy reclaimed and strengthened through adversity. As night settled fully over my backyard, I smiled into the darkness. Sarah would have approved. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.